These tariffs have a possibility of having a relatively meaningful effect on economic activity. On the left-hand side, what you get a sense of is just how significant the proposed tariffs are at this point, and below that gives you an indication of the specific tariff policies that are adding up to those total numbers. At this point, the new administration's planned tariff activities, if they were to all be implemented, which they're all slated to do so in the next 30 days, give or take, would bring the US tariff rate to a level that is higher than it was, the highest level in 100 years, higher than it was basically since back to World War One, and higher than the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. That is quite an acute tightening in terms of the overall tariff policy, and would lead to a likely increase in costs to American consumers and businesses that amounts to about 1.6% of GDP. Now, when you're thinking about tariffs, the question is, uh, does that flow through into higher prices, or does that just lead to lower real demand and investment? And how it flows through is a question of whether or not households or businesses, and in particular households, have the income growth necessary to pay higher nominal prices. Back when we had a supply chain disruption a few years ago, rising incomes through a combination of rising wage incomes and significant fiscal transfers gave households significant spending power growth to pay higher costs when those prices rose. Today, the situation is pretty different. Labor markets are deteriorating to some extent, and there aren't those sort of large government transfers that we saw in the previous rise in prices. And so it's more likely that when we look at this, it nets out to being a negative real GDP or negative real demand effect than it is an overall, then it will drive an overall rise in prices. Essentially, a function of the fact that if you've got to spend on essentials and the prices of those essentials are going up as a function of the tariff policy, there will be cutbacks on other things. So, if you've got to buy a car and it's $15,000 more as a function of the tariff policies, you'll still buy the car, but your demand for various services, say travel services and things like that, will get cut back because your overall spending power isn't going to meaningfully change. And so I think that the question here is less about, are the tariffs specifically inflationary? They're, of course, specifically inflationary to the goods themselves. The question is not, are they globally inflationary? The question is, what happens to real demand here in response to much higher prices for of a lot of goods that don't have an immediate replacement with domestic production.